She said she'd never date a poor black man. Then fate crashed into her life at 60 miles per hour. Grace Whitmore, Charleston's golden heiress, thought she knew what love looked like. Polished, privileged, and perfectly matched to her social status. But when a violent storm sends her car tumbling down an embankment, it's Marcus Reed, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a family name tarnished by her father's company, who pulls her from the burning wreckage. What begins as a reluctant thank you spirals into forbidden feelings that ignite a firestorm of gossip, family opposition, and secrets buried for 20 years. As their worlds collide and class barriers crumble, an explosive truth emerges. Sometimes your soulmate is the very person society told you to avoid. Subscribe now and comment "Fate" if you believe some crashes are meant to happen, because this love story is about to turn Charleston's social order upside down. The rain pounded against Grace Whitmore's windshield as she gripped the steering wheel of her Mercedes. Tears blurred her vision almost as much as the storm. The charity gala that should have been a tribute to her father's memory had turned into a nightmare. "How dare he?" she whispered, remembering Daniel's smirk as he had joked about her father's outdated business methods to his lawyer friends. Her fiancé of 2 years should have known better. Her father had only been gone 8 months, and the wound was still raw. Grace wiped away a tear, trying to focus on the dark, winding road ahead. The coastal highway outside Charleston was treacherous in good weather. Tonight, with the storm, it felt downright dangerous. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Daniel, no doubt, wondering where she'd gone after storming out. Grace glanced down for just a second. That second changed everything. Her tires hit a patch of standing water. The car hydroplaned, spinning wildly. Grace screamed as the Mercedes veered off the road, crashing through the guardrail. There was a sickening lurch as the car tumbled down the embankment, metal crunching and glass shattering before everything went dark. Marcus Reed wiped his grease-stained hands on a shop towel. It was nearly midnight, and he'd finally finished Mrs. Taylor's old Buick. The elderly widow couldn't afford much, but Marcus couldn't bear to see her stranded. "You're a good man, Marcus Reed," Sam Carter had told him before heading home. "But your good heart won't pay these bills." Marcus sighed as he looked around Reed Auto Repair. The small garage was his life's work, his father's dream that he'd managed to revive after years away from Charleston. Business was slow, but steady. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. His work. He was locking up when a flash of lightning illuminated the world outside. In that brief moment, Marcus saw something impossible. Headlights plunging over the embankment across from his shop. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his flashlight and ran into the downpour. The rain pelted his face as he scrambled down the muddy slope. Lightning revealed the horrifying scene, a luxury car crumpled like a tin can, smoke beginning to rise from its mangled hood. "Hello? Anyone in there?" Marcus shouted, rushing to the driver's side window. Through the cracked glass, he saw a woman slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down her pale face. The interior was filling with smoke. Marcus tried the door. Jammed. The smoke was getting thicker. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" he called, but she didn't move. With no time to waste, Marcus grabbed a rock and smashed the rear window. The car's frame groaned as he pulled himself through, glass cutting his arms. He reached the unconscious woman and carefully unbuckled her seatbelt. "I've got you," he said, though she couldn't hear him. "I'm going to get you out of here." As if sensing the danger, the woman's eyelids fluttered briefly. Her blue eyes, dazed with confusion and pain, met his for just a moment before closing again. Marcus cradled her in his arms and maneuvered back through the broken window. The moment his feet hit the ground, A terrible whoosh behind him announced that the fire had found the leaking gas tank. Heat blasted his back as he ran. The woman clutched tightly against his chest. He didn't stop until they were safely up the embankment. Only then did he look back to see flames consuming what remained of the beautiful car. "You're safe now," he whispered to the unconscious woman as rain washed over them both. "I've got you." Grace's head throbbed. She felt warm, dry, and strangely comfortable considering her last memory was of her car spinning out of control. Slowly, she opened her eyes. Unfamiliar surroundings came into focus. She was lying on a worn but clean couch in a small living room. A handmade quilt covered her. Across from her, a man sat in a recliner, his head nodding forward in sleep. Even in the dim light, she could see he was black, with strong features and powerful shoulders. Grace tried to sit up. Pain shot through her head, and she couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips. The man's eyes flew open. "Whoa, easy there," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "You took quite a hit to your head." "Who are you?" Grace demanded, pulling the quilt tighter around herself. "Where am I?" "My name's Marcus Reed. You crashed your car near my auto shop." He moved slowly, as if trying not to frighten her. "I brought you to my place since the ambulance said it'd be an hour with the flooding." Grace's hand flew to her forehead, feeling a bandage there. "I cleaned up the cut," Marcus explained. "It's not too deep, but you might want a doctor to look at it tomorrow." Grace narrowed her eyes, suspicious despite his calm demeanor. How convenient that a mechanic happened to be nearby when an expensive car crashed. If her accusation bothered him, Marcus didn't show it. "What's convenient is that you're alive, ma'am. Your car caught fire right after I got you out." The memory came back in flashes, spinning tires, shattering glass, then strong arms carrying her through rain and darkness. Grace looked away, uncomfortable with both her rescue and her rudeness. "I need to call my mother," she said finally. "Your phone was pretty smashed up," Marcus replied, nodding toward a shattered iPhone on the coffee table. "You can use mine." He handed her a simple smartphone in a weathered case. Grace took it, careful not to let their fingers touch, and dialed her mother's number. Eleanor Whitmore answered on the first ring, her voice tight with worry. "Grace, where are you? Daniel said—" "Mother, I've had an accident," Grace interrupted. "My car went off the road in the storm." She glanced at Marcus, who had discreetly moved away to give her privacy. "A mechanic pulled me out. I'm at his home now." The pause on the other end spoke volumes. "What's the address?" Eleanor finally asked, her tone clipped. Grace looked to Marcus, who quietly provided his address. After relaying it to her mother, Grace added, "Send James with the car, please, not Daniel." When she hung up, an awkward silence filled the small room. Grace noticed for the first time that Marcus's shirt was singed at the back, his arms bearing several cuts. "You're hurt," she said. Marcus shrugged. "Nothing serious." "You went into a burning car for a stranger." "Wasn't burning yet when I went in." His mouth quirked in a half smile. "Timing is everything." Grace wasn't used to people who made light of their own courage. In her world, every good deed came with an expectation of recognition or reward. "My family will want to thank you properly," she said, the words sounding stiff even to her own ears. Marcus shook his head. "No need for that. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. The Whitmore estate sat on 3 manicured acres overlooking the Atlantic. Grace had grown up within its pristine white walls, learning the importance of appearance, status, and never, ever causing a scene. The morning after the accident, she sat at the breakfast table across from her mother, feeling like a chastened child despite being 29 years old. The mechanic's address is in that neighborhood? Eleanor Whitmore's face pinched with disapproval. James said it was barely more than a shack. He saved my life, Mother, Grace said, wincing as her head throbbed. And we're grateful, of course. Eleanor stirred her tea precisely 3 times, as she always did. I've instructed Willis to send him a reward. $5,000 should be appropriate. Grace's spoon clattered against her china plate. You're sending the family lawyer with money? Like he's some kind of service provider? Isn't he? Eleanor raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. He fixed a problem, and now we compensate him. That's how these things work, Grace. Before Grace could argue, Daniel arrived, letting himself in without knocking as he'd done since their engagement. Darling, he exclaimed, rushing to kiss her cheek. When I heard about the accident, I was beside myself. Why didn't you call me? Because you're the reason I was upset and driving recklessly in a storm, Grace thought, but didn't say. Instead, she allowed him to fuss over her, his lawyer's hands smooth and uncalloused against her skin. Eleanor tells me some local hero pulled you from the wreck, Daniel said, taking the seat beside her. Very dramatic. His name is Marcus Reed, Grace said. He owns Reed Auto Repair. Reed? Daniel's expression shifted slightly. Wasn't there some trouble with a Reed family years ago at one of your father's properties? Eleanor's teacup froze halfway to her lips. That was a long time ago. Grace frowned. What trouble? Nothing important, dear, Eleanor said quickly. What matters is that you're safe, and we'll make sure this Mr. Reed is properly thanked. Later that afternoon, Grace's assistant Megan returned from delivering the envelope to Reed Auto Repair. He wouldn't take it, Megan reported, looking bewildered as she placed the envelope on Grace's desk. Said he doesn't accept payment for doing the right thing. Grace stared at the envelope, stunned. In her experience, everyone had a price. Did he say anything else? Megan shook her head. Just asked if you were recovering well. Something about this simple concern touched Grace in a way the grand gestures of her society friends never did. She picked up the local newspaper Megan had brought with her morning coffee, finding the small article about her accident on page 3. Charleston heiress rescued from burning vehicle, the headline read. The brief article mentioned her name, the crash, and credited local business owner Marcus Reed with the rescue. No photo, no fanfare, just facts. Grace read it twice, then folded the paper carefully. For reasons she couldn't fully explain, she found herself driving back toward Reed Auto Repair the next day. The garage was busy when Grace arrived, nothing like the quiet scene she'd glimpsed the night of the accident. 2 cars were up on lifts, and a third waited outside. Country music played from a radio, barely audible over the mechanical sounds of the shop. Grace stepped out of her mother's Bentley, feeling oddly self-conscious in her designer sundress and heels. She clutched her purse, containing the envelope of cash, as she approached the open bay door. Marcus was bent over an engine, his strong back to her. Beside him, an older man with salt and pepper hair glanced up at her approach. Well, well, the older man said. Looks like we've got a visitor, Marcus. Marcus straightened and turned. Recognition flickered in his dark eyes as he wiped his hands on a rag. Ms. Whitmore, he said with a nod. How's your head? Better, thank you. Grace was surprised by how nervous she felt. In boardrooms and ballrooms, she never lacked confidence. Here, surrounded by tools she couldn't name, and men who worked with their hands, she felt strangely out of place. Marcus introduced the older man as Sam Carter, his right-hand man. Sam's handshake was firm, his smile genuine, but Grace noticed how his eyes assessed her expensive clothes and car. I wanted to thank you personally, Grace said to Marcus, opening her purse. "And to insist you accept this token of my family's gratitude." She held out the envelope. Marcus glanced at it, but made no move to take it. "I appreciate the thought," he said. "But like I told your assistant, I don't need payment." Grace felt her cheeks flush. She wasn't accustomed to having her generosity, or anything else, refused. "It's not payment," she insisted. "It's a thank you." "Then say thank you," Marcus replied simply. "That's enough." Sam snorted softly, turning back to the car they'd been working on. "Told you he's stubborn, didn't I?" he said to no one in particular. Grace felt a flare of irritation. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The moment the words left her mouth, she regretted them. They sounded exactly like the privileged, entitled woman she feared she might be. Marcus looked at her steadily, his expression unreadable. "I know who you are, Ms. Whitmore. Do you?" The question struck her like a physical blow. Before she could formulate a response, a customer arrived to pick up their car. Marcus excused himself, leaving Grace standing there with the envelope still in her hand and her carefully constructed words unspoken. Feeling dismissed and strangely ashamed, Grace turned on her heel and walked out, her silk scarf slipping from her shoulders in her haste. Later that evening, after the last customer had gone and Sam had headed home, Marcus found the scarf draped over the creeper near where Grace had stood. The delicate silk was cool against his calloused fingers, the soft floral scent of her perfume still clinging to it. He should have been kinder, he knew. The woman had nearly died 2 days ago. But something about Grace Whitmore stirred old wounds. Her unconscious privilege. The way she'd looked around his shop as if it were a foreign country. The envelope of money that suggested his decency could be bought. Marcus carefully folded the scarf and placed it on his office shelf. He'd have to return it somehow, though the prospect of another awkward encounter with Grace Whitmore wasn't appealing. As he closed up shop, his mind kept returning to the moment he'd carried her from the burning car. How light she'd felt in his arms despite the designer clothes and jewelry. How vulnerable. Nothing like the frosty woman who'd stormed out of his garage today. "Not your problem, Reed," he muttered to himself as he locked the door. But even as he drove home to his small rental house, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Grace Whitmore was more complicated than she appeared, and that, against all his better judgment, he wanted to understand why. "Darling, you simply must try the crab cakes," Eleanor Whitmore instructed as she greeted fellow members of the Charleston Garden Society. "The chef has outdone himself this year." Grace nodded and smiled, playing her part as the dutiful daughter and hostess of the annual charity luncheon. But her mind wasn't on the carefully arranged flowers or the delicate pastries that decorated the tables on the Whitmore estate's south lawn. 3 days had passed since her visit to Reed Auto Repair. 3 days of replaying Marcus's words in her mind. "I know who you are, Ms. Whitmore. Do you?" "Grace, are you listening?" Daniel's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood beside her in a seersucker suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "Sorry, what were you saying?" Grace asked, forcing herself to focus. "Mrs. Bennett was just asking about your accident," Daniel said, gesturing to an older woman whose family had been in Charleston society since before the Civil War. "I was telling her about your dramatic rescue by the local mechanic." "Black fellow, wasn't he?" Mrs. Bennett asked, her voice lowered slightly on the word black, as if it were somehow inappropriate for polite company. "Yes," Grace replied. "Marcus Reed, he owns Reed Auto Repair." "How fortunate he was there," Mrs. Bennett said with a practiced smile. "These people can be so helpful in the right circumstances." Grace felt something twist in her stomach. "These people?" Daniel squeezed her elbow in warning, but Grace ignored him. "Mrs. Bennett, Marcus Reed risked his life to save mine. He pulled me from a burning car while everyone else was safely home in bed. I hardly think helpful covers it. The older woman's smile tightened. Of course, dear. I simply meant— I know what you meant, Grace interrupted, surprising herself with the edge in her voice. An uncomfortable silence fell over their small circle. Daniel laughed nervously, steering the conversation toward safer waters. You'll have to excuse Grace, he said smoothly. She's still recovering from the trauma. As the luncheon continued, Grace found herself trapped in conversation after conversation about her accident. Each retelling felt more hollow than the last, especially when guests inevitably expressed surprise that a black mechanic had been her rescuer. The words always came with that same slight pause, that same unspoken judgment. It wasn't until Mrs. Taylor, her elderly neighbor, found her alone by the rose garden that Grace felt she could breathe normally again. You look like you could use a break from all this fuss, the widow said, taking a seat beside Grace on a stone bench. Grace smiled gratefully. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been watching society functions for 70 years, Mrs. Taylor replied with a wink. Her arthritis-gnarled hand patted Grace's. Tell me about this young man who saved you. The real version, not the one you've been reciting for the vultures. The simple kindness in the question brought unexpected tears to Grace's eyes. He refused to take a reward, she said after a moment. Said you can't put a price on doing the right thing? Mrs. Taylor nodded. Sounds like a man of principle. Reminds me of my Harold. Your husband? Grace asked. Though Mrs. Taylor had lived next door for years, Grace realized she knew very little about the woman's life. 42 years we were married, Mrs. Taylor confirmed. He was a janitor at the hospital where I nursed. Not a wealthy man, but the richest in character I've ever known. Her eyes grew distant with memory. People like that, they measure wealth differently than folks like us, Grace. They understand what actually matters. As Mrs. Taylor spoke of her late husband's quiet dignity and generosity, Grace felt something shift inside her. A question forming that she'd never considered before. What if all the values she'd been raised with, status, wealth, appearances, weren't actually valuable at all? That evening, Grace found herself driving past Reed Auto Repair on her way home from dinner. She told herself it was simply because it was on her route, though it absolutely wasn't. The garage was closed, but a light shone from the small office at the back. Through the window, Grace could see Marcus at a desk, bent over paperwork. Alone. She slowed the car, but didn't stop. Something held her back, pride, perhaps, or the fear of another rejection. So she drove on, but the image of Marcus working late, surrounded by the tools of his honest trade, stayed with her long into the night. The next day, Grace had lunch scheduled with Daniel at Harborview, one of Charleston's most exclusive restaurants. They hadn't spoken much since the charity luncheon, and Grace wasn't particularly looking forward to the conversation she knew was coming. Daniel was already seated at their usual table when she arrived, his expression making it clear he wasn't pleased. You're late, he said instead of a greeting. Traffic on King Street, Grace replied, though in truth she'd deliberately taken her time. She smoothed her napkin across her lap. How was court this morning? Fine. Daniel signaled the waiter for wine. We need to discuss your behavior yesterday. And there it was. Grace took a deep breath. My behavior? You embarrassed Mrs. Bennett, and me. Daniel's voice was low, controlled. What's gotten into you lately, Grace? Ever since that accident, you've been different. Before Grace could respond, a commotion near the restaurant's side entrance caught their attention. A delivery truck had broken down, blocking access to the kitchen. The manager was gesturing frantically while the young delivery driver looked increasingly distressed. Ridiculous, Daniel muttered. They should restrict deliveries to service hours. Grace watched as a familiar figure approached the scene. Marcus, wearing work clothes and carrying a toolbox, assessed the truck's problem with quick efficiency. Within minutes, he was underneath the vehicle while the grateful driver and manager looked on. "Isn't that your mechanic?" Daniel asked, following her gaze. "He's not my mechanic," Grace replied automatically. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Well, whoever's mechanic he is, he shouldn't be crawling around in the dirt right outside a fine dining establishment. It's unseemly." Grace turned to stare at her fiancé, seeing him suddenly as if from a great distance. "Unseemly? He's helping someone who needs it." "Yes, well, there are appropriate places for that sort of thing." Daniel sipped his wine. "Speaking of appropriate, I think we should move up the wedding date. Your mother agrees that a fall wedding would be lovely, and it would give people something to talk about besides your adventure." Outside, Marcus had fixed whatever was wrong with the truck. The delivery driver was pumping his hand enthusiastically, relief evident on his young face. Marcus smiled, a genuine, warm smile that Grace realized she hadn't seen before. It transformed his serious face, lighting up his eyes. "Grace?" Daniel's impatient voice broke through her thoughts. "Did you hear me? About the wedding?" At that moment, Marcus happened to look toward the restaurant windows. His eyes met Grace's, recognition dawning. Grace felt her cheeks warm, embarrassed to be caught staring, but she didn't look away. Neither did Marcus. It was Daniel who broke the moment, following Grace's gaze and letting out a scoff of disbelief. "Is he staring at you?" he demanded. "The nerve of some people." "He saved my life, Daniel," Grace said quietly. "And I'm sure he's been well compensated. That doesn't give him the right to gawk at my fiancé." Daniel pushed back his chair. "I'm going to have a word with him." "Daniel, don't," Grace began, but he was already striding toward the door. Grace hurried after him, reaching the sidewalk just as Daniel confronted Marcus, who was packing up his tools. "I think you've mistaken my fiancé for someone who would welcome your attention," Daniel was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension he reserved for people he considered beneath him. Marcus straightened slowly, his expression carefully neutral. "No mistake. I recognized Ms. Whitmore from the other night. Just acknowledging someone I've met." "Yes, well, consider her acknowledged. You've done your good deed, received your reward. There's no need for further interaction." Grace felt mortification wash over her. "Daniel, stop it." Daniel ignored her. "In fact," he continued, "I'd appreciate it if you'd direct any future automotive emergencies to a more appropriate establishment. Green's Auto Services in Mount Pleasant is excellent." Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "I believe Ms. Whitmore can make her own decisions about where to take her car. Grace has people who make those decisions for her," Daniel replied with a dismissive wave. "People who understand quality and standards." "Quality and standards," Marcus repeated, nodding slowly. "Interesting values to emphasize while you're publicly disrespecting someone who's done nothing to you." The simple truth of the statement hung in the air between them. Several diners had paused to watch the exchange, their curious eyes moving between Daniel's flushed face and Marcus's controlled expression. "You know nothing about respect," Daniel hissed, his composure slipping. "Know your place." "Daniel!" Grace gasped, horrified, but Marcus just picked up his toolbox, his movements deliberate and dignified. "I know exactly who I am and what I'm worth, Mr. Hayes. Do you?" The echo of his earlier question to Grace was not lost on her. Without another word, Marcus nodded politely to her, got into his truck, and drove away. Daniel turned to Grace, straightening his tie as if brushing off the encounter. "Can you believe the audacity? Come on, our lunch is getting cold." But Grace stood rooted to the spot, watching Marcus's truck disappear down the street. In that moment, she knew with sudden clarity that she couldn't go back inside and pretend nothing had happened. Couldn't continue this lunch, this day, this life, without addressing the truth that was becoming impossible to ignore. "I need to apologize to him," she said. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. "For what? Grace, he's nobody." "That's where you're wrong," Grace replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "He's somebody who deserves better than what just happened. And so do I." Without waiting for Daniel's response, Grace walked to her car. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she didn't care what anyone thought as they watched her go. Grace drove with no particular destination in mind, just needing to put distance between herself and the restaurant. Daniel's words kept replaying in her mind. Know your place. Had she really agreed to marry someone who would speak to another human being that way? Almost without conscious decision, she found herself turning toward Reed Auto Repair. The afternoon sun beat down on the small garage, where business seemed to be slow. Only one car was up on the lift, and Sam was the only person visible, washing his hands at a sink near the back. Grace parked and took a deep breath before stepping out of her car. Sam looked up, recognition and surprise crossing his weathered face. "Well, look who's back," he said, not unkindly. "If you're looking for Marcus, he's in the office." "Thank you," Grace replied, smoothing her dress nervously. "I need to speak with him." Sam gestured toward the small room at the back. "Doors open." Grace made her way through the garage, feeling oddly like she was entering foreign territory. The smell of oil and metal filled her nostrils, so different from the perfumed world she normally inhabited. Marcus sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, looking troubled. He glanced up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face. He held up one finger, asking her to wait. "Yes, I understand it's a good opportunity," he was saying. "The pay is better, no question. But Atlanta's a long way from home. I know. Let me think about it, okay? Thanks for the call." He hung up and turned his full attention to Grace. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon?" "I'm sorry about Daniel," Grace blurted out. The words had been building inside her since she'd left the restaurant, desperate to escape. What he said was inexcusable. Marcus studied her for a moment. "Why are you apologizing for someone else's behavior?" The question caught her off guard. Because he's my fiancé. He was speaking to you that way because of me?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "He was speaking to me that way because of him. His choices aren't your responsibility." Grace hadn't expected this response. In her world, appearances were everything. One family member's behavior reflected on everyone. "Still," she insisted, "I'm sorry you had to experience that." A small smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth. "I've experienced worse, Ms. Whitmore." The simple statement hung in the air between them, a reminder of realities Grace had never had to face. She shifted uncomfortably. "I believe this is yours," Marcus said, reaching behind him to retrieve her silk scarf from a shelf. "You left it last time." "Oh." Grace reached for it, her fingers brushing his as she took the carefully folded square of fabric. "Thank you for keeping it. It seemed too nice to leave in the garage." An awkward silence fell between them. Grace realized she had no real reason to be there beyond the apology she'd already offered. Yet something kept her from leaving. "That phone call," she said finally. "It sounded like a job offer?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Something like that. A bigger garage in Atlanta wants to bring me on as head mechanic." "Are you going to take it?" "Haven't decided." He gestured to the small garage around them. This place was my dad's dream. Took me years to save enough to reopen it after. He trailed off, something dark passing over his expression. After what? Grace prompted. Marcus shook his head. Ancient history. Sam appeared in the doorway, breaking the moment. Mrs. Taylor's here for her car, he announced, then grinned at Grace. Your neighbor, I hear. Mrs. Taylor? Grace was surprised. She never mentioned knowing you. Been fixing her car for years, Marcus explained, standing up. Sweet lady. Husband was a good man. As if summoned by their conversation, Mrs. Taylor appeared behind Sam, her kind eyes lighting up at the sight of Grace. Well, goodness me, the elderly woman exclaimed. Grace Whitmore, what are you doing in a place like this? Before Grace could respond, Mrs. Taylor continued with a wink. Besides talking to this fine young man who saved your life, of course. Grace felt her cheeks warm. I was just returning a scarf I left. Mrs. Taylor's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a second. Marcus, is my old girl ready to go? Good as new, Marcus assured her, leading the way back into the main garage. Change the oil, fix that rattling in the heat shield, and replaced your wiper blades. Should be all set for another 6 months. What do I owe you this time? Mrs. Taylor asked, opening her worn purse. Marcus named a figure that Grace suspected was far below the actual value of the work. Mrs. Taylor counted out the cash carefully, then pressed it into his hand. Your father would be proud of you, the older woman said softly. Still the most honest mechanic in Charleston. Something passed between them, a shared history that Grace wasn't privy to. She watched as Marcus helped Mrs. Taylor into her ancient Buick, making sure her seatbelt was secured before closing her door. You're good with her, Grace observed as Mrs. Taylor drove away. She was kind to my family when others weren't, Marcus replied. His eyes met Grace's, assessing. Why are you really here, Ms. Whitmore? The directness of the question startled her. In Grace's social circle, people rarely said what they meant, preferring instead to dance around difficult topics with pleasantries and innuendo. I don't know, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. I guess I wanted to make sure you were okay after what happened. I'm fine. Marcus's expression softened slightly. But thank you for asking. Sam cleared his throat loudly from across the garage. I'm heading out for lunch. You two want anything? We're fine, Sam, Marcus called back, though his eyes never left Grace's face. Thanks. After Sam left, an awkward silence fell again. Grace fiddled with her scarf, wondering why she felt so nervous. Would you like some coffee? Marcus asked suddenly. It's not fancy, just shop coffee, but it's hot. The unexpected invitation made Grace smile. I'd like that. Marcus led her to a small break area tucked into the corner of the garage. A coffee maker that had seen better days sat on a small counter beside a mini fridge. He poured 2 mugs, handing one to Grace. No cream, I'm afraid. Just sugar, he apologized. Grace took the mug, their fingers brushing briefly. Black is fine. They sat at a small table, the sounds of the garage, the tick of cooling engines, the distant hum of traffic, filling the space around them. Tell me about yourself, Grace said impulsively. The real version, not the one I'm sure people like my fiancé have constructed. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty open-ended request. Start with the basics, then. How long have you owned this place? 3 years, Marcus replied, warming to the subject. My dad started it back in the 90s, but we had to close when I was a teenager. Took me 15 years to save enough to reopen it under the same name. What happened? Grace asked. Why did you close? Marcus's expression clouded. He seemed to consider his words carefully. My dad was accused of stealing from his employer. He didn't do it, but it didn't matter. Word gets around in a town like Charleston. Grace felt a chill. Who was his employer? A real estate developer, big name in these parts. Marcus's eyes held hers steadily. Whitmore Properties. The revelation hit Grace like a physical blow. My father's company? Marcus nodded. Your father's company, but it wasn't his decision. He was overseas when it happened. His property manager handled it. Grace's mind raced. Her father had always prided himself on being fair to his employees. This didn't sound like him at all. I'm so sorry, she said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. I had no idea. Why would you? Marcus shrugged. It was a long time ago. My family moved to Georgia after that. Dad never recovered from having his reputation damaged. Died believing most people thought he was a thief. Grace set down her mug, her appetite for coffee gone. But you came back to Charleston? Had to, Marcus said simply. This was home, and I needed to clear our family name, even if only in my own mind. The unfairness of it all washed over Grace. While she had been growing up in privilege, never questioning the foundation of her family's wealth, people like Marcus had been struggling with the fallout from decisions made in her father's name. I want to make this right, she said impulsively. Marcus gave her a sad smile. Some things can't be fixed with money, Ms. Whitmore. Grace? She corrected him. Please call me Grace. Grace? He repeated, her name sounding different in his deep voice. What happened back then isn't your fault. You don't need to make anything right. Before she could respond, the door to the garage banged open, and Sam returned with lunch. The moment between them broke, reality rushing back in. Grace stood, suddenly aware of how long she'd been there. I should go, she said, gathering her purse and scarf. Thank you for the coffee. Any time, Marcus replied, walking her to her car. As Grace drove away, she couldn't help glancing in her rearview mirror. Marcus stood watching her leave, his tall figure framed by the garage that represented both his family's pain and his personal triumph. Something had shifted between them, something neither of them had anticipated or sought. And Grace wasn't at all sure what to do about it. You did what? Eleanor Whitmore's voice rose sharply, her teacup clattering against its saucer. Grace, have you lost your mind? They sat in the sunroom of the Whitmore estate, afternoon light streaming through the windows. Grace had just finished telling her mother about her visit to Reed Auto Repair and what she'd learned about Marcus's father. I went to apologize for Daniel's behavior, Grace repeated calmly. And I discovered that our family might have been responsible for ruining an innocent man's reputation. Eleanor's face had gone pale. That was nearly 20 years ago. Why are you dredging this up now? Because I want to know the truth, Grace insisted. Was Marcus's father really stealing from us? Her mother's hesitation told Grace everything she needed to know. Mother? She pressed. Eleanor sighed, suddenly looking older than her 58 years. The property manager at the time, Jackson, I believe, reported missing inventory from the Charleston Heights development. The Reed man was in charge of maintenance. It seemed logical. But was there proof? Grace demanded. Your father was in London on business, Eleanor continued, avoiding the question. The company needed to take swift action to protect its reputation. These decisions are never simple, Grace. Was there proof? Grace repeated, her voice harder. Eleanor looked away. Not conclusively, no. But appearances matter in business, just as they do in society. Surely you understand that. Grace felt sick. A man's life had been ruined based on appearances. A family had lost their livelihood and their home because someone in her father's company had decided it was more important to look decisive than to be just. We need to make this right, she said firmly. After 20 years? Don't be ridiculous. Eleanor set her cup down with finality. And I must say, Grace, this sudden interest in a garage mechanic is concerning. What would Daniel think? The mention of her fiancé brought another wave of unease. Daniel, who had looked at Marcus with such contempt. Daniel, who had never in 3 years of knowing him shown the kind of quiet courage Marcus had displayed pulling her from a burning car. I'm not sure I care what Daniel thinks anymore, Grace said quietly. Eleanor's eyes widened. Grace Elizabeth Whitmore, you cannot be serious. The Hayes family is one of the most respected in Charleston. The wedding plans are already underway. Plans can change. What has gotten into you? Eleanor demanded. Ever since that accident, you've been different. Perhaps we should have Dr. Simmons take a look at you. Head injuries can affect judgment. Grace couldn't help but laugh at that. My judgment is clearer than it's been in years, Mother. Maybe nearly dying has a way of making you see what actually matters. Before Eleanor could respond, the doorbell rang. Moments later, Willis, the family lawyer, was shown into the sunroom. Ladies, he greeted them with a formal nod. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Eleanor said, composing herself quickly. We were just finishing our tea. Willis looked uncomfortable, his usual confident demeanor somewhat strained. I've been reviewing some old company files, as requested, and I found something that might interest you both. Grace sat up straighter. After her first visit to Marcus's garage, she had asked Willis to look into the incident with Marcus's father. She hadn't expected results so quickly. What did you find? She asked. Willis extracted a folder from his briefcase. Regarding the theft accusations at Charleston Heights in 2006, it appears that several months after Joseph Reed's termination, the actual culprit was identified. Eleanor's teacup froze halfway to her lips. What? The property manager's assistant eventually confessed to the thefts, Willis continued. He had been selling materials on the side. By then, of course, the Reed family had already left town, and the company decided it would be counterproductive to publicize the error. Counterproductive? Grace repeated, anger building inside her. An innocent man's reputation was destroyed, and the company decided it would be counterproductive to clear his name? Willis looked genuinely remorseful. Different times, Ms. Whitmore. The decision was made by the executive team while your father was still overseas. By the time he returned, it was considered a closed matter. Grace turned to her mother. Did you know about this? Eleanor's silence was answer enough. Get out, Grace said quietly to Willis. Both of you, please leave me alone. For once, her mother didn't argue. Eleanor rose with dignity, gesturing for Willis to follow her. At the doorway, she paused. Grace, whatever you're thinking of doing, please consider the consequences. For everyone. After they left, Grace sat alone in the sunlight, tears streaming down her face. Not just for Marcus and his father, but for herself, for all the times she'd accepted the comfortable lie rather than seeking the uncomfortable truth. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect summer day that seemed to mock Grace's inner turmoil. She had barely slept, her mind racing with revelations and decisions. By the time she arrived at the charity car fair her family sponsored annually, Grace had made up her mind. The event, held in a large park near downtown, raised money for local children's hospitals. Various auto businesses from around Charleston volunteered their services, offering free basic maintenance to attendees while collecting donations. Grace spotted Reed Auto Repair's booth right away. Marcus and Sam had set up near the park's entrance, already busy with a line of cars waiting for oil changes and minor repairs. Taking a deep breath, Grace made her way toward them. She had dressed simply today, jeans and a blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Still, she felt heads turn as she walked through the crowd. Marcus looked up from the car he was working on, surprise registering on his face when he saw her approaching. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning," he greeted her cautiously. "Hi," Grace replied, suddenly nervous. "I didn't know you'd be here today." "We volunteer every year," Marcus explained. "Good cause." Sam emerged from under a car on a creeper, grinning when he saw Grace. "Well, well, the boss's favorite customer. Come to get your oil changed?" Grace laughed despite her nervousness. "I actually came to help. This is my family's event, after all." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You know how to change oil?" "No," Grace admitted. "But I can learn, can't I?" Sam let out a bark of laughter. "I like her," he told Marcus. "She's got spirit." For the next hour, Grace helped at their booth, taking down names, organizing tools, and even learning to check tire pressure under Marcus's patient guidance. His hands were gentle as they showed her how to use the gauge, his voice calm as he explained the proper PSI readings. People stared, of course. Grace Whitmore, heiress to the Whitmore fortune, getting her hands dirty at a charity event was unusual enough. That she was doing so alongside Marcus Reed, a black mechanic from the other side of town, made it downright scandalous. But for the first time in her life, Grace didn't care what anyone thought. There was something liberating about focusing on the simple, honest work of helping others. Something satisfying about learning a practical skill instead of just writing checks. During a quiet moment, as Marcus was showing her how to change a flat tire, Grace gathered her courage. "I found out something yesterday," she said quietly, "about your father." Marcus's hands stilled on the lug wrench. "What about him?" "The company records showed he was innocent. Another employee confessed to the thefts months after your family left town." Grace's voice shook slightly. "The company knew, Marcus. They knew, and they didn't tell anyone." Marcus was silent for so long that Grace feared she had made a terrible mistake bringing it up. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," Grace replied. "And because I want to make it right, somehow." Marcus set down the wrench and stood up, meeting her gaze directly. "My father died believing most of this town thought he was a thief. How exactly do you plan to make that right?" The pain in his eyes made Grace's heart ache. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I want to try. Please, let me try." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. "Why do you care so much?" he asked. The question caught Grace off guard. Why did she care? A week ago, she wouldn't have given Marcus Reed or his family a second thought. But something had changed the night he pulled her from that burning car. Something was still changing every time they spoke. "Because you're more of a man than most men I know," she said honestly. "And because what happened to your family was wrong. I can't change the past, but maybe I can help shape a better future." Their eyes held for a long moment, the sounds of the fair fading around them. Then Sam cleared his throat loudly, breaking the spell. "We've got a line forming," he announced, nodding toward several cars waiting their turn. Marcus nodded, his professional demeanor returning. "Let's get back to work." As they moved to the next car, a photographer from the local paper snapped several photos of Grace helping Marcus check the engine oil. Neither of them noticed, too absorbed in their task, and the newfound understanding growing between them. The photo appeared online that night and in the newspaper the next morning. Grace Whitmore, laughing as Marcus Reed showed her how to check engine oil levels. Their hands were both on the dipstick, their faces close together. a warmth between them that the camera had somehow captured perfectly. The caption read, "Whitmore heiress and local hero team up at charity event." By noon, Eleanor Whitmore was storming into Grace's home office, the newspaper clutched in her hand. "Have you seen this?" she demanded, slapping the paper down on Grace's desk. "It's all over social media as well. What were you thinking?" Grace glanced at the photo. She looked happier in it than she had in any society portrait taken in the last 5 years. "I was thinking I wanted to learn something useful," she replied calmly. "And I did." "Grace, people are talking." Eleanor lowered her voice, as if sharing a terrible secret. "About you and him. His name is Marcus, Mother, and people always talk. Isn't that what you taught me?" Eleanor sank into the chair across from Grace's desk. "This isn't like you. The Grace I raised would never deliberately court scandal." "Maybe the Grace you raised needed to wake up," Grace replied, gentler now. "Nearly dying has a way of changing your perspective." Eleanor looked at her daughter as if truly seeing her for the first time in years. "You're not just doing this to rebel or to cause a stir, are you?" "No," Grace admitted. "I'm doing it because when I'm around Marcus I feel real. Like myself, not some version I'm expected to be." Her mother was silent for a long moment. "And Daniel? Have you considered what this is doing to him? To your engagement?" The mention of her fiancé brought a wave of guilt. Grace hadn't spoken to Daniel since the incident outside the restaurant 2 days ago. He had called and texted repeatedly, but she hadn't been ready to face him. "I need to talk to Daniel," she acknowledged. "Today." Eleanor rose, smoothing her already perfect skirt. "Just be careful, darling. Not everyone is as open-minded as you're becoming. Actions have consequences." After her mother left, Grace sat staring at the newspaper photo. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Seems we're famous now." A smile spread across her face as she replied, "For better or worse, are you okay with it?" His response came quickly. "I've had worse things written about me. You?" Grace thought about it. Her entire life had been spent avoiding exactly this kind of public attention. Yet now that it was happening, she found she didn't mind. "Surprisingly okay?" she texted back. "Coffee later? I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause before his reply appeared. "Shop closes at 6. Come by after." Grace set down her phone, her decision made. It was time to face Daniel. Daniel Hayes's law office occupied the top floor of a sleek building overlooking Charleston Harbor. Grace had been there countless times for cocktail parties and fundraisers, but today, the marble lobby and glass elevators felt cold and impersonal. Daniel's secretary ushered her in immediately, despite her lack of appointment. Being a Whitmore still had its privileges. "Grace!" Daniel rose from behind his massive desk, coming around to kiss her cheek as if nothing had happened. "I've been trying to reach you. Where have you been hiding?" "I needed some time to think," Grace replied, remaining standing even when he gestured to the plush client chair. Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "About what happened at the restaurant?" "Grace, I was only looking out for you. That mechanic was staring—" "His name is Marcus," Grace interrupted, "and he wasn't doing anything wrong." "Fine, Marcus," Daniel conceded with obvious reluctance. "But surely you understand how it looked. You're Grace Whitmore. People like him don't just look at people like you." The casual bigotry in his words hit Grace like a slap. Had he always been this way? Had she simply never noticed, or worse, never cared? "What exactly does that mean, Daniel?" "People like him?" Daniel sighed as if explaining something to a child. "You know what I mean, Grace? He's a mechanic. He gestured vaguely. "Black?" Grace supplied, her voice icy. Is that what you can't bring yourself to say? I'm not a racist, Daniel insisted, his lawyer's training kicking in. I've done pro bono work for underprivileged communities. I have black colleagues. But you don't see Marcus as my equal, do you? As your equal? Daniel's expression hardened. This isn't about race, Grace. It's about standards, background, education, culture. Surely you're not suggesting that a man who works with his hands changing oil is equivalent to… To what? Grace challenged. To you? A man who's never had to work for anything in his life? Who's never risked anything for another person? That's unfair, Daniel protested. I've worked hard to get where I am. Have you? Or did your father's connections and your family's money smooth the way? Grace shook her head. I'm not saying you're not smart or capable, Daniel, but you've never had to overcome what someone like Marcus has. Daniel's face flushed with anger. I can't believe we're arguing about some random mechanic who happened to be in the right place at the right time. What's gotten into you lately? Clarity, Grace answered simply. I've been seeing things clearly for the first time in years. She took a deep breath. Including us. Daniel went very still. What about us? Grace slowly removed the diamond engagement ring from her finger and placed it on his desk. I can't marry you, Daniel. I'm sorry. Is this a joke? He demanded, staring at the ring as if it might bite him. Because of one argument? Because I was rude to your mechanic friend? No, Grace replied. Because I don't love you. Maybe I never did. I loved the idea of you, the perfect Charleston lawyer from the perfect family. But that's not enough anymore. Daniel's expression shifted from shock to calculation. This is about him, isn't it? I saw that photo in the paper. Are you actually involved with him? This is about me, Grace insisted. About who I want to be and the life I want to live. Your mother will never accept this, Daniel warned. Breaking an engagement to a haze? For what? Some fantasy of playing garage girl with a mechanic? Grace turned to leave. Goodbye, Daniel. You'll regret this, he called after her. When the novelty wears off and you remember who you really are, you'll come crawling back. Grace paused at the door. That's where you're wrong. I'm finally discovering who I really am, and she's nothing like the woman you thought you knew. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever came next, with Marcus, with her family, with her life, at least it would be her choice. Her truth. Reed Auto Repair was quiet when Grace arrived that evening. The other mechanics had gone home, and only a single light burned in the small office at the back. Marcus was at his desk, bent over paperwork, a cup of coffee growing cold beside him. He looked up as she knocked on the open door, his expression carefully neutral. You made it. I said I would, Grace replied, suddenly nervous. She held up a carrier with 2 coffee cups. I brought reinforcements. Black for you, right? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You remembered. I pay attention, Grace said, setting his cup on the desk and taking the seat across from him. They sipped their coffee in comfortable silence for a moment. Grace noticed a copy of the newspaper on his desk, folded to show their photo. Your mom must have loved that, Marcus said, following her gaze to the paper. She was concerned, Grace admitted. So was Daniel. Your fiancé? Grace held up her bare left hand. Not anymore. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. Because of the photo? Because of me, Grace replied honestly. Because I finally realized we wanted different things from life, different values. Marcus set his coffee down carefully. Grace, I don't want to be the reason your life falls apart. You're not. she assured him. "You're the reason I'm finally seeing it clearly. There's a difference." He studied her face, as if looking for signs of uncertainty. "What did you want to talk to me about?" Grace took a deep breath. "I went through my father's old business records. I found documentation proving your father's innocence in the theft case. I want to publicly clear his name." Marcus went very still. "How would you do that?" "A press release from Whitmore Properties. A formal apology. Full acknowledgement of the company's mistake and the damage it caused to your family." Grace leaned forward earnestly. "It won't bring your father back, I know, but it might help restore his reputation, his legacy." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, emotions playing across his face that Grace couldn't fully read. "Why would you do this?" he asked finally. "It could damage your family's company, their reputation." "Because it's right," Grace said simply, "and because some reputations aren't worth protecting if they're built on lies." Marcus stood suddenly, turning to look out the small office window. His back was to her, his shoulders tense. "My dad used to say that a man's good name was the only thing no one could take from him," he said quietly. "Turned out he was wrong about that." "Let me give it back," Grace pleaded. "Please, Marcus." He turned to face her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It would mean a lot. To me and to my mom, back in Georgia." Grace stood, moving closer to him. "Consider it done." Their eyes held, something unspoken passing between them. Slowly, hesitantly, Marcus reached out to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "You're nothing like I expected, Grace Whitmore," he murmured. "Is that a good thing?" she whispered. His answer was to lean down and kiss her, softly and briefly, a question more than a declaration. When he pulled back, Grace's heart was racing. She had been kissed before, by Daniel, by college boyfriends, but never like this. Never with this mixture of tenderness and restraint, as if she were something precious, but also strong. "I should go," she said, though it was the last thing she wanted. Marcus nodded, stepping back. "It's getting late." Grace gathered her purse, suddenly shy. At the door, she turned back. "Are you free on Saturday? There's a town fair I thought we might go to." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "People will talk even more." Grace smiled. "Let them." As she drove home, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Pure, uncomplicated happiness. Whatever challenges lay ahead, for this moment at least, her heart was light. She didn't notice the car following her at a discreet distance, didn't see Daniel's angry face behind the wheel, or the phone in his hand as he snapped photos of her leaving Marcus's garage. Some storms were still gathering on the horizon, unseen but approaching fast. The town fair was in full swing by the time Grace arrived on Saturday morning. Colorful banners stretched across Main Street, and the smell of funnel cakes and barbecue filled the air. Children darted between game booths, while local bands played on a small stage near the waterfront. Grace felt oddly nervous as she scanned the crowd for Marcus. They had texted throughout the week, but this was different. This was public, intentionally so. She spotted him near the ring toss booth, talking with Sam and a few other men she didn't recognize. He wore jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. Grace's heart skipped as he caught sight of her and smiled. "You came," he said as she approached. "I said I would," Grace replied, echoing his words from the garage. Sam grinned at them both. "Well, well, if it isn't the town's most famous duo." Grace blushed, but Marcus just rolled his eyes. "Ignore him," he told Grace. "Sam thinks he's funny." "I am funny," Sam protested. "And observant." You two made quite the splash with that photo." Indeed, Grace had felt eyes on her since the moment she'd arrived. The whispers weren't exactly subtle. Charleston was a small town in many ways, especially among the social circles she'd grown up in. Word of her broken engagement to Daniel had spread quickly, and her appearance at the fair with Marcus would only add fuel to the fire. Strangely, she found she didn't mind. There was something liberating about stepping outside the carefully constructed box she'd lived in for 29 years. "Hungry?" Marcus asked, seeming to sense her thoughts. "The church ladies have a pie booth that's worth the wait." "Lead the way," Grace replied, smiling as he offered his arm. As they strolled through the fair, Grace noticed something she'd never experienced before. In her normal life, at galas and charity luncheons, people approached her with calculated smiles and careful compliments, always aware of her family's influence. Here, among Marcus's community, the greetings were different, warmer, more genuine. "Marcus, man, that transmission fix is running smooth as silk," called an older man selling handcrafted furniture. "Ms. Roberta's looking for you," a young mother told him as they passed. "Says her grandson needs advice about trade schools." At each stop, Marcus introduced Grace simply as "my friend Grace," with no mention of her last name or family connections. Some people clearly recognized her from the newspaper photo, but they treated her with the same friendly directness they showed Marcus. "You know everyone," Grace observed as they finally reached the pie booth. Marcus shrugged. "Small community, we look out for each other." Mrs. Taylor was volunteering at the booth, her face lighting up when she saw them together. "Well, isn't this a pleasant surprise?" she said, winking at Grace. "What can I get for you two?" Marcus ordered peach pie for himself and looked questioningly at Grace. "The same," she said, reaching for her purse. "My treat," Marcus insisted, placing money in the donation jar before she could protest. They found a small table near the water, away from the main crowd. The morning sun sparkled on the harbor, fishing boats bobbing gently in the distance. "So this is how the other half lives," Grace said lightly, taking a bite of her pie. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Eating excellent pie by the water? Yes, we do suffer so." Grace laughed, then grew more serious. "I just mean, everyone seems so connected here. They actually know each other. In my world, it's all surface, all show." "Every community has its pros and cons," Marcus replied. "People know your business here, for better or worse. When my dad was accused, we felt every whisper, every changed glance." Grace set down her fork. "The press release goes out Monday. The company lawyer tried to water it down, but I insisted on a full acknowledgement of what happened." Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking out at the water. "It won't change what happened, but it means something that the truth will finally be out there." Impulsively, Grace reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers were warm and strong against hers. "Thank you," he said simply. They spent the rest of the morning exploring the fair. Grace helped Marcus at the dunking booth, where he'd volunteered to be dunked to raise money for the local youth center. She cheered along with the crowd when a teenage girl's perfect throw sent him splashing into the tank. "You didn't have to look so happy about that," he complained good-naturedly as he toweled off afterwards. "Oh, but I did," Grace teased. "It was for charity, after all." In the afternoon, they wandered toward the small dance floor that had been set up near the bandstand. An older couple was teaching swing dance steps to anyone willing to learn. "Do you dance?" Grace asked, watching the couples twirl. "Not like that," Marcus admitted. "You?" "Ballroom, mostly. Debutante training." Grace made a face. "Not exactly useful in real life." "I don't know," Marcus said, his eyes twinkling. "Seems pretty useful right now." He held out his hand. "Teach me?" Grace blinked in surprise. Really? Why not? Marcus shrugged. Unless you're embarrassed to be seen teaching a mechanic how to waltz. Never, Grace replied firmly, taking his hand. She led him to the edge of the dance floor, aware of curious glances but choosing to ignore them. Placing his hand at her waist, she guided his other hand to hold hers. It's simple, she explained. Just a box step. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Marcus was a quick learner, his natural coordination making up for his lack of formal training. Soon they were moving smoothly around the floor, Marcus adding his own flourishes that made Grace laugh with delight. Not bad for a beginner, she said as the song ended. Good teacher, he replied, his eyes warm on hers. As dusk fell, white lights twinkled to life around the harbor, giving the fair a magical glow. Marcus bought them cotton candy to share, the sweet pink fluff dissolving on Grace's tongue as they walked along the pier. I've lived here my whole life, and I don't remember the last time I did this, Grace mused, looking out at the darkening water. Did what? Enjoyed my hometown like a regular person. No expectations, no family name hanging over me. Marcus leaned against the railing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. Is it really that hard? Being a Whitmore? Grace considered the question. Not hard in the ways that matter, I guess. I've never worried about money or opportunities. But there's a weight to it. Always knowing that everything you do reflects on the family, on the business. Sounds lonely, Marcus observed. Grace glanced at him, surprised by his insight. It can be. What about you? Do you ever get tired of being everyone's reliable mechanic? Marcus smiled. Sometimes, but I like being someone people can count on. After what happened with my dad, it matters to me that people in this town know the Reed name stands for something good. His quiet dignity touched Grace deeply. Here was a man who had every reason to be bitter, yet had chosen to rebuild rather than retreat. You're a good man, Marcus Reed, she said softly. I try to be, he replied. The moment stretched between them, intimate despite their public setting. Then, gently, Marcus leaned in and kissed her. Unlike their first kiss in his office, this one lingered. Grace felt herself melting into it, into him, all the barriers and pretenses she'd built over years falling away. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb stroking her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. Grace knew with sudden clarity that there would be no going back to the person she was before. Before the accident, before Marcus. Neither of them noticed Daniel standing in the shadows at the end of the pier, his face tight with anger as he watched them. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, but Grace awoke to storm clouds of a different kind. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since 7 a.m. with messages from her mother, friends, and even business associates. The reason became clear when she checked social media. Someone had posted photos of her and Marcus at the fair, dancing, sharing cotton candy, and most damning of all, kissing on the pier at sunset. The pictures were everywhere, along with captions ranging from merely curious to downright nasty. Whitmore heiress slums it after breaking engagement, read one particularly vicious post. Grace's hands shook as she scrolled through the comments. People she'd known all her life, people who smiled to her face at charity events, were now speculating about her mental state, her morals, even suggesting she was only with Marcus for some kind of exotic thrill. Her mother called for the 5th time as Grace was getting dressed. This time, she answered. Have you seen what's happening online? Eleanor demanded without preamble. Good morning to you too, Mother, Grace replied, keeping her voice steady with effort. This is not the time for sarcasm, Grace. Your reputation is being dragged through the mud, By people who don't know me or Marcus, Grace pointed out. Why should I care what they think? Because you are a Whitmore. Eleanor's voice rose. Because this affects more than just you. The company shares are already down 3 points this morning. Grace hadn't considered that the gossip might impact the business. That's ridiculous. My personal life has nothing to do with Whitmore Properties. Everything a Whitmore does affects the company. You know that. Eleanor sighed heavily. Grace, please. Think about what you're doing. Daniel called me this morning, very concerned. A chill ran down Grace's spine. Daniel called you? He's worried about you, darling. We all are. First the accident, then breaking your engagement, now this public display with that mechanic. His name is Marcus, Grace said automatically. Fine, Marcus, Eleanor conceded. The point is, people are talking, clients are uncomfortable, and the timing couldn't be worse, with the press release about his father scheduled for tomorrow. Grace frowned. What does that have to do with anything? It will look like, well, like you're being manipulated, like this young man is using his connection to you to force the company into some kind of admission of guilt. That's not what's happening, Grace insisted. The company was wrong about his father. We have proof. The press release is the right thing to do, regardless of my personal relationship with Marcus. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. So there is a relationship then? It's not just gossip? Grace hesitated. Whatever was developing between her and Marcus felt too new, too precious to label. But she knew what her mother was really asking. I care about him, she said finally. And yes, we're seeing each other. But that has nothing to do with the press release or the company? Oh, Grace, Eleanor sighed. You always were your father's daughter, stubborn as they come. Another pause. At least come to dinner tonight. We need to discuss how to handle this publicly. I'm having dinner with Marcus tonight, Grace replied. His friend Sam invited us over. Reschedule, Eleanor said, her voice turning imperious. This is family business. For a moment, Grace was tempted to give in, as she had so many times before. It would be easier. But then she thought of Marcus, of his courage in returning to a town that had rejected his family, of his kindness to Mrs. Taylor, of the way he looked at her as if seeing the person she could be, not just the name she carried. I can't, Mother. I've made a commitment. A commitment to a dinner with a mechanic and his friends is hardly... It's important to me, Grace interrupted firmly. I'll come by tomorrow morning before work, and we can talk then. After hanging up, Grace texted Marcus. Have you seen the photos online? His reply came quickly. Hard to miss. You okay? Grace smiled, despite her worry. It was just like him to be concerned about her when he was likely facing his own backlash. I'm fine, she texted back. Looking forward to tonight. Sam Carter's home was a modest bungalow in a neighborhood of similar houses, each with a small but well-kept yard. Wind chimes tinkled from several porches, and the smell of grilling meat filled the evening air. Grace felt nervous as Marcus walked her to the door. This wasn't a charity function or a business dinner. This was Marcus's world. Real people with real connections, and she desperately wanted them to accept her. Relax, Marcus murmured, sensing her tension. They're going to love you. How can you be so sure? Grace whispered as they reached the door. Marcus smiled. Because He stopped, seeming to reconsider his words. Because you're easy to love, he finished softly. Before Grace could process this almost declaration, the door swung open to reveal Sam, wearing an apron that read, The Man, the Myth, the Legend. About time you two showed up, he said, grinning. The whole internet's been waiting. Grace laughed despite herself, some of her nervousness melting away. Sam had a gift for cutting through tension. Inside, she was introduced to Sam's wife, Dina, a kindergarten teacher with a warm smile and no-nonsense manner. Their teenage daughter Zoe was there too, along with Mrs. Taylor and a few other friends from the neighborhood. "So you're the famous Grace," Dina said, handing her a glass of lemonade. "I've heard a lot about you, even before you two became social media famous." "All good things, I hope," Grace replied. "Marcus doesn't talk much," Dina said with a wink. "But when he does, it matters." The evening unfolded with an ease Grace hadn't expected. No one mentioned the photos or the gossip. Instead, they drew her into their conversations about local politics, children's sports teams, and neighborhood renovation projects. They asked her opinion and actually listened to her answers, not because she was a Whitmore, but simply because she was there, part of the circle. During dinner, a delicious spread of Sam's famous ribs and homemade sides, Zoe finally brought up what everyone had been politely avoiding. "So are people being awful to you online?" the teenager asked bluntly. "Because they're being pretty racist about Uncle Marcus." "Zoe!" Dina admonished. "What? It's true," Zoe insisted. "I saw the comments." Marcus set down his fork. "Those people don't matter," he said firmly. "But they do," Grace disagreed quietly. "Not because they're right, but because that kind of thinking hurts real people. It's hurt your family before." A somber silence fell over the table. Then Mrs. Taylor spoke up, her voice clear despite her age. "When my Harold and I got married in '75, there were people who wouldn't speak to us after. My own cousin didn't come to the wedding because Harold was black. Said it would confuse the children." The elderly woman shook her head. 50 years later, and some things haven't changed enough." "Some things have changed," Sam pointed out. 20 years ago, Marcus and Grace wouldn't even be sitting at this table together without half the town having a conniption. "Progress moves at a snail's pace," Mrs. Taylor agreed. "But it does move." "What are you going to do about the press release?" Dina asked Grace. "My sister works at Whitmore Properties. She says there's talk about delaying it because of you two." Grace felt Marcus tense beside her. "The press release is going out tomorrow as planned," she said firmly. "It's already written and approved. The company owes Marcus's family that acknowledgement. Won't it look like—" Dina hesitated. "Like I'm sleeping with the boss's daughter to get justice for my family?" Marcus finished, his voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, that's what some people will say." Grace reached for his hand under the table. "Let them talk. We know the truth." After dinner, as the group moved to Sam's back porch for coffee and dessert, Marcus pulled Grace aside. "You sure you want to go through with the press release tomorrow?" he asked, his expression concerned. "It's going to make things harder for you." Grace touched his face gently. "I'm sure. Your father deserves to have his name cleared. The fact that She paused, gathering her courage. "The fact that I'm falling for his son doesn't change that." Marcus's eyes widened slightly at her admission. Then he leaned down and kissed her, brief but tender. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. The moment was interrupted by Sam calling them back to the porch, but something had shifted between them. A deeper understanding, a promise of possibilities. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Taylor approached Grace while Marcus was helping Sam with the grill. "He's special, that one," the elderly woman said, nodding toward Marcus. "His father was the same, good to the core." "I'm starting to see that," Grace replied. Mrs. Taylor patted her hand. "Standing where your heart stands isn't always easy, child, but it's always right." The simple wisdom of the statement stayed with Grace long after Marcus drove her home. Standing where your heart stands. For the first time in her life, she felt she was finally doing exactly that. Monday morning arrived with a mix of anticipation and dread. The press release was scheduled for 9 a.m., and Grace had promised to meet her mother beforehand. The Whitmore estate was quiet when she arrived, the morning sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Eleanor was waiting in the sunroom, dressed impeccably as always, a tablet open before her. "Good morning, Mother," Grace greeted her, bending to kiss her cheek. Eleanor gestured to the seat across from her. "How was your dinner?" "Lovely," Grace replied truthfully. "Marcus's friends are good people." "I'm sure they are." Eleanor's voice was carefully neutral. "Grace, before we discuss the press release, there's something you should know." She handed Grace the tablet. On the screen was an email from Daniel with several photo attachments. "Daniel sent these to the board members this morning," Eleanor explained. "He says he's concerned about undue influence on company decisions." Grace scrolled through the photos with growing horror. There she was, leaving Marcus's garage last week. The angle made it look as if she were sneaking out after a liaison. Another showed them in what appeared to be an intimate conversation at his desk, though in reality they had been discussing the press release. "He's making it look like—" Grace couldn't even finish the sentence. "Like you're being manipulated," Eleanor finished for her. "Like your judgment is compromised." "That's ridiculous," Grace protested. "The evidence about Mr. Reed's innocence exists independently of my relationship with Marcus." "I know that," Eleanor said, surprising Grace. "But the board is concerned about appearances. They've called an emergency meeting this morning. They want to postpone the press release." Grace felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. "They can't do that. It's already been approved." "They can, and they might," Eleanor replied. Unless what?" Grace asked, suspicion growing. Eleanor looked uncomfortable. "Unless you agree to distance yourself from Marcus Reed, at least publicly, until this dies down." "You want me to stop seeing him?" Grace's voice rose in disbelief. "Because it might look bad for the company?" "I want you to be careful," Eleanor insisted. "Daniel is angry, Grace. He's using his connections on the board to hurt you, and by extension, this young man you care about." Grace stood up, anger coursing through her. "So I should just give in? Let Daniel win?" "I'm asking you to be strategic," Eleanor replied. "If you truly care about clearing Joseph Reed's name, then consider what approach is most likely to achieve that goal." Grace paced the sunroom, mind racing. She had promised Marcus the press release would go out today. His mother was flying in from Georgia for the announcement, but if the board blocked it? "What if I don't attend the board meeting?" she asked finally. "What if I make it clear this is not about me or my personal life, but about the company doing the right thing?" Eleanor considered this. "It might work. The press release was your father's project, after all. I could emphasize that, make it about honoring his legacy of integrity." Something in her mother's tone made Grace look at her more closely. "You knew, didn't you, about Mr. Reed's innocence? All along?" Eleanor didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter than Grace had ever heard it. "I suspected. Your father was in London when it happened, but when he returned, he was troubled by the whole affair. He had the legal team investigate quietly." "And they found proof he was innocent?" Grace finished. Eleanor nodded. "By then, the Reed family had left town. Your father wanted to make it right, but the board convinced him it would only reopen old wounds. Better to let sleeping dogs lie." "Except they weren't sleeping for the Reeds," Grace pointed out. "They lost everything. Their home, their reputation, their place in this community." "I know," Eleanor admitted. It's haunted your father for years. When he got sick, he talked about making amends. That's why I didn't fight you on the press release. It's what he would have wanted." The revelation stunned Grace. All this time, she had assumed her mother was defending the company's actions. Instead, she had been carrying her husband's unfinished business, his regret. "Help me get this done, Mother," Grace said quietly. "Not just for Marcus or for me, but for Dad too." Eleanor stood, smoothing her immaculate dress. "I'll speak to the board. You stay away. Give them less ammunition to claim you're unduly influencing things." She hesitated, then added, "And Grace, be careful with your heart. Not because of who Marcus is, but because hearts are fragile things." It was as close to a blessing as Grace could hope for at this point. The press release went out at 9 a.m. as scheduled. Grace watched from her office as the announcement appeared on the Whitmore Properties website and was picked up by local news outlets. "Whitmore Properties acknowledges wrongful accusation against former employee Joseph Reed," the headline read. The statement detailed the facts of the case, confirmed that another employee had later confessed to the thefts, and expressed deep regret for the harm caused to Mr. Reed and his family. Grace immediately texted Marcus. "It's done." His reply was simple, but spoke volumes. "Thank you. Mom's in tears. Good ones." Throughout the morning, Grace fielded calls and emails about the announcement. Some were supportive, praising the company's integrity in acknowledging a past mistake. Others were more pointed, questioning the timing and suggesting, just as Daniel had intended, that her relationship with Marcus had influenced the decision. By lunchtime, Grace was exhausted but satisfied. She had just ordered a sandwich to be delivered when her office door opened without a knock. Daniel stood there, looking as perfectly groomed as always, but with anger simmering beneath his polished exterior. "What are you doing here?" Grace asked, hand automatically moving toward her phone. "We need to talk," Daniel replied, closing the door behind him. "About this morning's little performance." "The press release wasn't a performance," Grace said firmly. "It was the company acknowledging a wrong that should have been corrected years ago." Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Come on, Grace. We both know what this is. You're infatuated with this mechanic, and you're using your family's company to impress him." "You don't know what you're talking about," Grace replied, anger rising. "And you had no right to send those photos to the board. They were deliberately misleading." "I had every right to protect this company from a serious lapse in judgment," Daniel countered. The Grace I knew would never have jeopardized her family's reputation for a fling with someone so clearly beneath her. "The Grace you knew doesn't exist anymore," Grace shot back. "Maybe she never did, because the woman I am now sees exactly what you are. A small, insecure man who can't stand the idea that I might choose someone who actually has substance over someone who just has status." Daniel's face darkened. "You think he cares about you? He's using you, Grace. For your money, your influence. Once he's gotten what he wants, this press release, this public vindication for his family, he'll move on." "You're wrong," Grace said, though a tiny seed of doubt tried to take root. "Marcus isn't like that." "All men are like that," Daniel insisted. "He's no different just because he works with his hands instead of his head." He leaned closer across her desk. "Tell me, did he mention the job offer in Atlanta before or after he kissed you?" Grace froze. "What are you talking about?" Daniel's smile was triumphant. "Oh, he didn't tell you? Your boyfriend has been offered a position at Hendricks Automotive Group. Senior mechanic, much better pay than his little shop brings in. He interviewed weeks ago before you two even met." "How do you know this?" Grace demanded, though her mind was racing. She remembered the phone call she'd overheard at Marcus's garage. "The pay is better, no question, but Atlanta's a long way from home." I have friends at Hendricks, Daniel replied smoothly. When I saw you two getting cozy, I did some checking. Turns out Reed has been planning his escape from Charleston for months. Just needed to clear the family name first. Grace felt sick, not because she believed Marcus was using her, but because Daniel had been investigating him, looking for ammunition. Get out, she said quietly. Grace, get out now, she repeated, standing, or I'll call security. After Daniel left, Grace sat heavily in her chair. The seed of doubt grew despite her best efforts. Why hadn't Marcus mentioned the job offer? Was he planning to leave Charleston? To leave her? Once his father's name was cleared? She picked up her phone to call him, then set it down again. This wasn't a conversation to have over the phone, and she needed time to think, to sort through Daniel's accusations and her own fears. By the time she left the office that evening, Grace had made up her mind. She would ask Marcus directly about the job offer. Their relationship, whatever it was becoming, had to be built on truth, even difficult truths. She was so preoccupied with these thoughts that she almost missed the voice calling her name as she walked to her car. Grace, wait up! Sam jogged across the parking lot toward her, looking uncharacteristically serious. Sam, what are you doing here? Looking for you, he replied. Marcus's mom had some kind of episode at the hotel. He's at Charleston Memorial with her now. Concern immediately pushed aside all other thoughts. Is she okay? Sam shrugged. Don't know details, just that it was serious enough for an ambulance. Marcus asked me to find you, said you weren't answering your phone. Grace checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from Marcus. She'd been in meetings all afternoon and had silenced it. I need to get to the hospital, she said. I'll drive you, Sam offered. You look too shaken up to get behind the wheel. In the car, Grace tried calling Marcus, but he didn't answer. Her worry grew with every unanswered ring. He really cares about you, you know, Sam said after a few minutes of silence. I haven't seen him like this since, well, ever. Grace glanced at him. Like what? Happy, Sam said simply. Hopeful. Like maybe the world isn't always going to kick him when he's down? The words hit Grace hard, washing away the doubt Daniel had tried to plant. Whatever Marcus's plans had been before they met, she believed in what was growing between them now. The hospital emergency room was busy when they arrived. Grace scanned the waiting area frantically, but didn't see Marcus. A nurse at the desk directed them to a family consultation room down the hall. Grace knocked softly before opening the door. Marcus sat alone, his head in his hands. He looked up as she entered, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Grace, he said, voice rough with emotion. You came. She went to him immediately, all questions and doubts forgotten. Of course I came. How's your mom? Marcus rubbed his face. Stable now, heart attack. Doctor says it was mild, but at her age... He trailed off. Grace sat beside him, taking his hand. I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? He squeezed her fingers. You're doing it. Just being here. They sat in silence for a moment, the beeping of distant machines and murmur of voices in the hallway, the only sounds. The press release, Marcus said finally. She saw it, was so happy about it. I'm glad, Grace replied. She deserved to see your father's name cleared. Marcus nodded, then added softly. The doctor thinks the excitement might have been too much for her heart. The press release, the trip here, everything. Grace felt a stab of guilt. Oh, Marcus. It's not your fault, he said quickly. Mom's had heart issues for years, and she wanted this, needed it, as much as I did. A doctor entered before Grace could respond, bringing an update on Mrs. Reed's condition. She would need to stay in the hospital for at least a few days for observation and tests. "She's asking for you," the doctor told Marcus. "One visitor at a time for now." Marcus stood, then hesitated, looking at Grace. "Will you wait? I won't be long." "As long as you need," she promised. After Marcus left with the doctor, Sam appeared with coffee for them both. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing Grace a cup. "Thanks." She took a sip of the bitter hospital coffee. "Have you known Marcus's mother long?" Sam nodded. "Since we were kids. She's good people, tough as nails, had to be after what happened." Grace hesitated, then decided to ask the question that had been gnawing at her. "Did Marcus tell you about a job offer? In Atlanta?" Surprise flashed across Sam's face. "Who told you about that?" "Daniel," Grace admitted. "My ex-fiancé. He has friends at Hendrix." Sam let out a low whistle. "Man's doing research on Marcus? That's some next-level jealousy." "Is it true?" Grace pressed. Sam sighed. "Yeah, it's true. They've been after him for months. Better pay, benefits, all that." He studied Grace's face. "He turned them down last week." Grace felt her heart skip. "He did? Why?" "You really have to ask?" Sam laughed softly. "Look, Marcus was all set to leave Charleston before he met you. This town held nothing but bad memories for him. He came back to prove a point, to rebuild what his father lost. The plan was always to clear the family name, then move on. And now?" Grace hardly dared ask. Sam's expression softened. "Now he's found a reason to stay." The simple truth of it washed over Grace like a warm wave. Before she could respond, Marcus returned, looking slightly less haggard. "She's resting," he reported. "Doctor says she's tough." "Like mother, like son," Sam replied, standing. "I should head out, check on Dina and Zoe. Call if you need anything, day or night." After Sam left, Marcus sank back into the chair beside Grace. "You don't have to stay," he told her. "It might be a long night." "I'm not going anywhere," Grace replied firmly. She took his hand. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me about the job offer in Atlanta?" His eyes widened slightly. "How did you—" "Daniel," she explained. "He's been checking up on you." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "Your ex needs a hobby." He sighed heavily. "I was going to tell you. It just didn't seem important anymore." "Because you turned it down?" Grace asked softly. A small smile touched his lips. "Sam's got a big mouth." "Is it true?" she persisted. "Did you turn it down because of me?" Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "I turned it down because for the first time since I came back to Charleston, this place feels like it could be home again. Because of you, yes, but also because of what you helped me do for my father, for my family." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Daniel thinks you were using me. That once the press release happened, you'd leave." "And what do you think?" Marcus asked quietly. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Grace whispered, the words escaping before she could consider them. "And it terrifies me." Marcus reached up to touch her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Good," he said, "because I'm already there, and it would be lonely on my own." In that sterile hospital consultation room, with worry for his mother hanging over them and the day's stress still lingering, they found something precious and real, a moment of perfect understanding, of hearts aligned. Marcus leaned forward and kissed her, a promise in the gentle pressure of his lips. When they parted, Grace rested her forehead against his. "We'll figure this out," she promised. "All of it, together." For the first time in her life, Grace felt completely, authentically herself. Not a Whitmore, not an heiress, not a role to play or an image to maintain. Just Grace, a woman standing exactly where her heart stood. Outside the window, rain began to fall, washing Charleston clean in the glow of the hospital lights. A circle complete from the night of the storm that had first brought them together. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm of hospital visits, takeout meals in waiting rooms, and quiet conversations in the moments between. Grace rearranged her work schedule to be there for Marcus as much as possible, taking calls from her office while sitting in the hospital cafeteria, her laptop perched on plastic tables. Mrs. Reed, Vivian, as she insisted Grace call her, was recovering well but still needed close monitoring. A lifetime of hard work and worry had taken its toll on her heart, the doctors said. She would need to make changes when she returned to Georgia. "I'm not going back to Georgia," Vivian announced on the 3rd day, surprising both Marcus and Grace. "Not to stay anyway, just to pack up my things." "Mom," Marcus began, concern evident in his voice. "The doctor said you need rest and stability. Moving isn't a good idea right now." Vivian Reed had the same determined look Grace had come to recognize in her son. "I've been resting for 20 years, ever since we left Charleston with our tails between our legs. Now that your father's name is cleared, I want to come home." "But your house, your friends," Marcus protested. "My house is just walls," Vivian interrupted, "and real friends will visit. Besides," she added with a pointed look at Grace, "seems to me you might need your mama around with all these new developments in your life." Grace felt her cheeks warm. Vivian had been nothing but welcoming to her, treating Grace with a warmth that had nothing to do with her family name, and everything to do with the way her son looked at her. "I'd love to help you find a place here," Grace offered. "I know real estate in the area pretty well." "That's kind of you, honey," Vivian replied. "But I was thinking something a bit more immediate." She turned to Marcus. "That little apartment above your garage has been sitting empty since you reopened, hasn't it?" Marcus looked surprised. "The old office space? It's hardly livable, Mom. No proper kitchen, bathroom needs work." "Sounds like a project," Vivian said with a smile. "And I believe my son knows a thing or two about fixing things up." Later, as they left the hospital for the evening, Marcus shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen her like this," he told Grace as they walked to the parking lot. "So determined." "I like her," Grace said, smiling. "I can see where you get your strength." Marcus took her hand, his fingers warm against the cool evening air. "Thank you for being here through all this. I know you've got your own work, your own life." "This is my life now, too," Grace replied simply. The truth of the statement settled between them, comfortable and right. In just a few short weeks, their worlds had intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. That rainy night of her accident. When they reached Grace's car, Marcus leaned against it, pulling her gently into his arms. "I'm going to need help with that apartment," he said. "Know any real estate heiresses who might be willing to get their hands dirty?" Grace laughed, wrapping her arms around his waist. "I might know someone. Her rates are steep, though." "Oh?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's her fee?" "Dinner," Grace replied, "and maybe a dance or two." Marcus's smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her. Deal. The transformation of the apartment above Reed Auto Repair became a labor of love over the next 2 weeks. What had once been a dusty storage space slowly emerged as a cozy one-bedroom home, with everyone pitching in to help. Sam and Marcus handled the plumbing and electrical work. Dina and Grace painted the walls in warm, cheerful colors. Even Mrs. Taylor contributed, hemming curtains for the small windows that overlooked the garage. Grace discovered she had a knack for interior design, finding affordable furniture that fit the small space while still feeling comfortable. She spent evenings scouring thrift stores and online marketplaces, delighting in each perfect find. "You're really enjoying this, aren't you?" Marcus observed one Saturday afternoon as they arranged the living room furniture. Grace stepped back to assess the placement of a small sofa they'd found at an estate sale. "I am," she admitted. "In my world, you just hire someone to make these decisions. This feels more real." "Real is good," Marcus agreed, coming to stand beside her. "Though I think my mom is going to need a bigger TV if she's going to watch her game shows." Grace laughed, leaning into him. "Already on order. Delivery tomorrow." As they worked side by side day after day, Grace felt a deeper connection growing between them. There was an ease to their partnership, a natural rhythm of give and take. Marcus never made her feel out of place despite her obvious wealth, and she never treated his work as less important than hers. Vivian was released from the hospital after 10 days, moving temporarily into Marcus's small house while the apartment renovations were completed. She watched their progress with obvious pleasure, offering suggestions and telling stories about the early days when Joseph Reed had first opened the garage. "He would be so proud," she told Marcus one evening as they all sat on the back porch after a long day of work. "Not just of the garage, but of the man you've become." The words clearly touched Marcus deeply. He didn't reply, but his hand found Grace's in the gathering darkness, squeezing gently. Later, as Grace prepared to drive home, Vivian pulled her aside. "I want to thank you," the older woman said. "Not just for the press release, though that meant the world, but for seeing my son, really seeing him, when so many in this town never bothered to look beyond the surface." "He's easy to see," Grace replied honestly. "He's the most genuine person I've ever known." Vivian nodded, her dark eyes wise and knowing. "Love looks beneath the surface, doesn't it? Finds the truth of a person?" "It does," Grace agreed, no longer surprised or frightened by the word love in connection with her feelings for Marcus. While Grace was finding joy in her new relationship, not everyone was celebrating. The social fallout from her broken engagement and new romance continued to ripple through Charleston society. Invitations to events that had once filled her mailbox slowed to a trickle. Former friends became suddenly busy when she called. Even business associates seemed more formal, more cautious in their dealings with her. Eleanor observed these changes with a mixture of concern and unexpected pride. "You're handling this with remarkable grace," she told her daughter over lunch at their favorite restaurant. "No pun intended." Grace smiled. "I'm finding that I don't miss most of it. The endless charity functions, the gossip disguised as concern, the constant performance." "And what about the friends?" Eleanor asked gently. "The connections you've had since childhood?" Grace considered this. "The real friends have stayed," she said finally. "Mrs. Taylor calls more often than ever, and I've made new friends, people who like me for myself, not for what my last name can do for them." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud of you, you know. He always said you had a stronger moral compass than either of us." "I miss him," Grace said softly. "Me too," Eleanor replied. "Every day." She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about what he would want for Whitmore Properties going forward." "What do you mean?" Grace asked. Eleanor straightened slightly in her chair, a familiar gesture when she was approaching a business topic. "The board is divided after the press release and everything else. Some members think we need a change in leadership, a new direction." "They want to push you out?" Grace was alarmed. Her mother had been co-running the company since her father's death. "Not exactly," Eleanor said carefully. "But they've suggested it might be time to bring in someone who can rebuild certain bridges, someone with connections to both old Charleston and new." Understanding dawned slowly. You mean me? I mean you, Eleanor confirmed. As the new director of community relations, a position with real power to shape how this company operates in the community, how it makes amends for past mistakes, how it moves forward. Grace sat back, stunned. I have no experience. You have exactly the experience needed, Eleanor interrupted. You understand both worlds now, Grace. The one you were born into and the one Marcus showed you. That's rare and valuable. The offer was unexpected, but somehow felt right, like another piece falling into place in Grace's changing life. I'd need time to think about it, she said. And to talk to Marcus. Eleanor smiled slightly. Of course. Take all the time you need. She hesitated, then added, And Grace? Bring him to dinner next week. It's time I got to know the man who's made my daughter so happy. Marcus was understandably nervous about dinner at the Whitmore estate. He arrived in his best clothes, dark slacks, and a blue button-down shirt, driving his well-maintained but distinctly modest truck. Your mother probably expected me to park around back, he joked as Grace met him at the front entrance. She expected you to come through the front door like any other guest? Grace corrected him, reaching up to straighten his collar. Relax. She doesn't bite. Much, Marcus muttered, but he smiled as Grace led him inside. The Whitmore home was every bit as impressive as Marcus had imagined. High ceilings, original artwork, furniture that probably cost more than his entire garage. But Grace moved through it all with a new ease, neither flaunting nor apologizing for her privileged surroundings. Eleanor was waiting in the formal living room, elegant as always, in a simple black dress. To Grace's surprise, her mother extended her hand to Marcus without hesitation. Mr. Reed, she greeted him. Welcome to our home. Mrs. Whitmore, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort. Thank you for having me. An awkward silence threatened to descend, but Eleanor smoothly guided them to seats, offering drinks and making small talk about Vivian's recovery. As dinner progressed, Grace watched with growing amazement as her mother made a genuine effort to know Marcus. Eleanor asked about his business, listened attentively to his plans for expansion, and even shared stories about Grace's father's early days in real estate. Joseph Whitmore started with nothing, Eleanor explained. His father was a janitor at the bank. Joseph worked his way through college, built his first development with loans no one thought he could repay. I didn't know that, Grace said, surprised. Eleanor smiled sadly. He didn't like to talk about it, thought it might make you feel different from your friends, whose families had old money. He needn't have worried, Marcus observed quietly. Grace has a way of finding her own path. Eleanor studied him for a moment, then nodded. Yes, she does, especially lately. After dinner, while Grace excused herself to take a brief work call, Eleanor led Marcus to Joseph Whitmore's study. The room remained exactly as he had left it, books lining the walls, a massive oak desk dominating the space, family photos carefully arranged on shelves. My husband kept a file, Eleanor said, opening a drawer in the desk. After the incident with your father. Marcus tensed slightly. I thought all that was settled with the press release. Officially, yes, Eleanor agreed, extracting a folder. But Joseph kept his own records. He never believed your father was guilty. She handed Marcus the folder. Inside were handwritten notes, copies of inventory reports, and a letter that had never been sent. The letter was addressed to Joseph Reed, expressing personal regret for the accusation and offering to help him start over. He wrote this a month after your family left town, Eleanor explained. But by then, you'd vanished. No forwarding address, no contact information. We wanted a fresh start, Marcus said quietly. Didn't think anyone here would care where we went. Joseph cared, Eleanor replied. It bothered him until the day he died. That's why. She hesitated. That's why I didn't fight Grace on the press release, despite the complications. Marcus closed the folder carefully. Thank you for showing me this. It would have meant a lot to my father. Eleanor nodded. Grace tells me you've turned down a job offer in Atlanta. A very good offer, from what I understand. I have other priorities now, Marcus said simply. My daughter, Eleanor stated rather than asked. Yes, Marcus acknowledged. But also my family's legacy here, my mother's return, the garage my father built. Eleanor studied him, her gaze assessing but not unkind. And if Grace wanted to leave Charleston? To live somewhere else? Somewhere you could both start fresh, without all this? She gestured vaguely, encompassing the house, the history, the complications. I'd go with her, Marcus replied without hesitation. But I don't think that's what she wants. No, Eleanor agreed. I don't think it is. She moved to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds. She's changing, you know, becoming more like her father, seeing beyond surface appearances to what really matters. She's always been that person, Marcus said. Just needed the chance to show it. Eleanor turned back to him, her expression softening slightly. Perhaps you're right. She paused, then added, You should know that I've offered Grace a position with the company, Director of Community Relations. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Impressive title. Impressive responsibility, Eleanor corrected. A chance to reshape how Whitmore Properties interacts with all of Charleston, not just the wealthy parts. She'd be good at that, Marcus said with genuine admiration. Yes, she would. Eleanor met his gaze directly. But I suspect she won't take it without your support. She values your opinion. She'll have my support in whatever she chooses, Marcus replied. That's what love means. The simple statement hung in the air between them, both challenge and declaration. Eleanor nodded slowly. I'm beginning to see why my daughter cares for you, Mr. Reed. Marcus, he corrected gently. Marcus, Eleanor agreed, the smallest smile touching her lips. Grace accepted the position with Whitmore Properties the following week, diving into her new role with enthusiasm and fresh ideas. Her first initiative was a scholarship program for trade school students, partnering with local businesses, including Reed Auto Repair, to provide internships and job placement. The apartment above, the garage, was completed by the end of the month, and Vivian moved in with a small celebration that brought together friends from both sides of Charleston. Eleanor attended, somewhat stiff but genuine in her efforts to connect with Sam, Dina, and the others. Daniel was conspicuously absent from Grace's life now, though rumors circulated that he was dating a banker's daughter from Savannah. As summer turned to fall, Grace found herself spending more and more time at Marcus's modest house. She kept clothes in his closet, a toothbrush in his bathroom. They developed routines: breakfast together before work, takeout and movies on Wednesday nights, helping in the garage on weekends. One evening in early October, as they sat on his back porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Marcus took her hand. I've been thinking, he said, his voice casual, though Grace could feel tension in his fingers, about our situation. What situation? Grace asked, curious. You're here most nights, he pointed out. Your fancy shoes are taking over my closet. You've rearranged my kitchen 3 times. Grace laughed. Are you complaining? Not at all, Marcus replied. But I was thinking it might make more sense if you just stayed permanently. Grace's heart skipped a beat. Marcus Reed, are you asking me to move in with you? He turned to face her fully, his expression serious despite his smile. I'm asking for more than that, Grace. I'm asking for a life together. Not just living in the same house, but building something real. A partnership. Are you proposing? Grace whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Unlike the massive diamond Daniel had given her, this ring was simple and elegant, a pearl surrounded by tiny sapphires. It was my grandmother's, Marcus explained. My mom brought it when she moved back, said it was time it found a new home. Tears filled Grace's eyes. It's beautiful. Not as beautiful as you, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. Grace Whitmore, you crashed into my life, literally, and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. I love your kindness, your courage, your willingness to see beyond the surface. I love who I am when I'm with you. He opened the box, revealing the vintage ring. Will you marry me? Yes, Grace replied without hesitation. Absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Grace felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in a way she never had before. This wasn't about social expectations or family connections. This was about love. Real, honest love between two people who had seen each other's hearts. Your mother might have a heart attack, Marcus joked as he pulled her close. She'll survive, Grace assured him. She's tougher than she looks. In truth, Eleanor had been slowly warming to the idea of Marcus as a permanent part of Grace's life. Their weekly dinners had become less strained, more genuine. Eleanor had even visited the garage to see Vivian's apartment, commenting favorably on Grace's design choices. What about the gossips? Marcus asked. Charleston's going to have a field day with this news. Let them talk, Grace said, echoing her words from months ago. We know the truth. Their kiss sealed the promise between them, a promise of partnership, of standing together no matter what came their way. They decided on a small wedding by the harbor, where the water that had once divided Charleston's different worlds could instead unite them. The date was set for spring, giving them time to plan and prepare. News of their engagement spread quickly through town, met with reactions ranging from genuine delight to poorly disguised disapproval. Grace found she cared less and less about the latter with each passing day. You've changed, Sam observed one afternoon as he helped Marcus with inventory at the garage. Grace was there too, having taken a half day from work to help with the books. Have I? Grace asked, looking up from the computer. You walk differently, Sam explained. Talk differently too. Less like you're on a stage, more like you're just you. Is that a compliment? Grace laughed. Highest kind, Sam assured her with a wink. Marcus crossed the shop to drop a kiss on the top of her head. He's right, you know. You've blossomed. So have you, Grace pointed out. When we first met, you barely smiled. Didn't have much to smile about then, Marcus admitted. Things change. Indeed they had. Reed Auto Repair was thriving, with a growing customer base that now included people from all parts of town. Marcus had hired 2 new mechanics and was considering expanding into the empty lot next door. Grace's work at Whitmore Properties was making real changes too. Her community initiatives had garnered positive press, helping to rebuild the company's reputation after the press release about Joseph Reed. She had even managed to secure board approval for an affordable housing project near downtown, something her father had dreamed of but never accomplished. Life wasn't perfect. There were still whispers when they entered certain restaurants together, still family friends who had quietly dropped away after the engagement announcement. Daniel had made good on his threats to make her regret her choices, using his connections to block some of Grace's business initiatives. But for every door that closed, others opened. New friends, new opportunities, new perspectives. Grace had never felt more alive, more purposeful, more herself. On a crisp afternoon in late October, exactly 1 year after the accident that had brought them together, Grace and Marcus returned to the spot where he had pulled her from the burning car. The guardrail had been repaired, no trace remaining of that night's drama. But they both felt the significance of the place, the way fate or chance or providence had intervened to change their lives. "I was so rude to you," Grace remembered, shaking her head at the memory. "When I woke up in your house, I practically accused you of having ulterior motives." Marcus laughed. "You were concussed, and probably in shock." "Still," Grace insisted, "I was every bit the privileged princess, wasn't I? Offering you money for saving my life, as if that could ever be enough." "And I was stubborn," Marcus admitted, too proud to accept even a thank you. They stood together at the edge of the road, looking down at the steep embankment where the accident had occurred. "Do you ever think about how easily it could have gone differently?" Grace asked. "If you hadn't been working late that night, if you hadn't looked up at exactly that moment." "I try not to," Marcus replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Too many what-ifs in life already." Grace leaned into his warmth. "I'm glad it was you who found me that night. Not just because you saved my life, but because you changed it." "We changed each other," Marcus corrected gently. A car passed on the road behind them, reminding them they were standing in a potentially dangerous spot. Marcus led Grace back to his truck, which was parked safely on the shoulder. Before they got in, he turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "What's this?" Grace asked as he handed her a small velvet pouch. "Open it," Marcus encouraged. Inside was a delicate gold charm in the shape of a car, not a sleek Mercedes like the one she'd crashed, but an old-fashioned model with intricate details. "For your bracelet," Marcus explained, nodding toward the gold charm bracelet her father had given her years ago. "A reminder." "Of the accident?" Grace asked, touching the tiny car gently. "Of the moment everything changed," Marcus corrected. "The night you crashed into my life and I pulled you from the wreckage. Literally and figuratively." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered, pulling him close for a kiss. When they parted, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "Ready to go home?" "With you? Always," Grace replied. As they drove away from the site of the accident, the setting sun painted the Charleston skyline in gold and pink. Grace watched it through the passenger window, marveling at how much had changed in just 1 year. She had lost a fiancé, but found a true partner. Lost some friends, but gained a family. Lost certainty, but gained purpose. The woman who had crashed that night, protected by privilege but imprisoned by expectations, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more alive. Marcus reached across the seat to take her hand, his grip warm and sure. Grace squeezed back, grateful for his strength, his integrity, his love. Together, they had broken through barriers of class and color, proving that real connection transcends all artificial divisions. Ahead of them lay challenges, certainly. A wedding to plan, families to blend, a community still wrestling with change, but Grace felt ready for all of it, as long as Marcus was by her side. The truck turned onto the street where they now shared a home, not the grand Whitmore estate or a flashy downtown address, but a modest house with a porch swing and a garden they'd planted together. A place that represented who they truly were, neither defined by wealth nor limited by its absence. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, glancing over at her thoughtful expression. Grace smiled. the pearl engagement ring catching the last light of day as she brushed a strand of hair from her face. I was just thinking that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best ones. That night, when my car went off the road, I thought my world was ending. And instead, Marcus prompted, pulling into their driveway. Grace leaned across the seat to kiss him gently. Instead, it was just beginning. As they walked hand in hand toward their front door, Grace felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her here. To a life filled with purpose and authenticity. To a love built on respect and understanding, rather than appearances or expectations. She had finally learned what Mrs. Taylor had tried to tell her all those months ago. Standing where your heart stands isn't always easy, but it's always right. And Grace Whitmore, soon to be Grace Reed, was standing exactly where she belonged. The end.